Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Company First, Price Last. In today's episode, we're looking at a company that built a multi-billion-dollar business by teaching software agents to live inside the ugliest parts of corporate bureaucracy. On the surface, it's a clean automation story, but the deeper you go, the more you realize how strangely dependent this automation business is on complex, human-involved legacy systems. The more I researched this company, the more uncomfortable I got seeing the tension between glowing AI marketing and the actual technological reality of what's being used. You'll see exactly what I mean. As always, this is not financial advice. It is for education and research only. If you choose to invest, your money is at risk. So, landscape, technology. First, we have mainstream computing brought to the masses in the early 1980s. Yes, there were business computers in the 1960s, but if you consider a computer the size of an apartment to be mainstream, let's have a chat. Second, 1985, Excel lands on the market. This single piece of software propping up the entire global financial system. And ever since then, computers have been integral to allowing knowledge workers to be productive, right? To get more done with their day for their beautiful overlords. Great, so we've got computers, we've got some software that we can use to run our businesses on. So what? Well, since then, until now, these computers and software have continued to evolve. And this gives birth to what's known as a data model, right? How the company generates and uses data for meeting its needs, selling to its customers, and paying its employees. It also covers things like filing information with the regulators for legal compliance and financial statements. And during this, you either had companies that got it and built great data models, or, and this is where the majority of cases lie, you had a bunch of buffoons buying up software left, right, and center to make it look like they're actually doing something for their obnoxious paychecks. They had no idea what the software actually does, they just heard the talk around it and everyone telling them they need to get it. Even if that meant trying to plug square software into circle holes. But it's very important that they did do it because they needed to keep that ship floating long enough to get that approval for the next compensation package. The result is absolute data disorder in this company. And so what do I mean by that? Well, it looks a little something like this. You've got Bob from finance. He's just extracted some revenue data to report to his manager for month end. At the same time, Sue from legal has also extracted some revenue data to report to their manager. James from procurement is asking Bob in finance for some revenue data so he can finalize a contract. But this data needs to go through some additional rework to allow for it to be formatted in a way that fits in the report. So Bob asks Tony to help in IT and transform the data in a different system to allow this. Compliance are asking Bob's manager what the revenue was for month's end for an ongoing litigation involving disputed contracts. Bob's manager tells compliance that they're just double checking the revenue figures and will get back on that shortly. Compliance, knowing that procurement probably already has the revenue data, asks James for the revenue data in the meantime, who promptly sends it over. Next week, Bob's manager, as promised, sends his revenue data back to compliance. But hey ho, it's not matching. What changed? Compliance asks Bob's manager, and Bob's manager gets upset with James and procurement for sharing the revenue data with compliance as it hadn't gone through final accounting adjustments yet. Now he has to explain financial accounting standards to the compliance team just to get them off his back. Basically, you've got multiple people doing the same task of extracting the same sort of data. You've got multiple systems used just to transform the data in a way that can be used for reports. And worst of all, you've now got a dozen different reports floating around of what August's monthly revenue was, none of them agreeing. Understandably, execs are tired of hearing the story play out in their companies. Those darn employees are just wasting time and using that precious money that could be spent on their paychecks. So what's one to do? This is where companies are finding themselves at a crossroads, right? Path A is scrap the lot and design a new data model from scratch. No duplicate systems, no duplicate tasks, streamlined data flows from ingestion, transformation, and reporting. If you choose this path, you've got companies like Databricks and Palantir who will be happy to help. Or path B, you decide to try and make the mess of a system your organization currently calls business as usual and slap on a new layer of tech to bring it all together. So between these two paths, how does one decide? It's one word: budget. You see, path A is premium stuff. It's the right way to go. It's the one that makes it expenny. It's the kind of stuff that's going to impact the bottom line and negatively impact the execs' paychecks. So this is where UiPath comes in for that shiny path B. At its core, UiPath develops software that replicates a human interaction with a computer. Okay. It's simply saying, instead of us trying to build the right data flow from A to Z, which then makes it really easy to automate, let's create a digital human that can interact with our traditional or existing software and computers. At the end of the day, it really is just training a monkey. Okay, what do you need? Well, you need some virtual desktops. Okay, so you've got a virtual operating system for the software, just put it on your existing computer hardware. Great. You need some computer vision, right? So that the software can actually understand what it's looking at on the virtual desktop. Then there's something called robotic process automation. Essentially, it's just a virtual mouse and keyboard so that they can use the desktop. And then finally, they've got some machine learning tech, nice and snazzy, that basically lets them read a Word document. So is there any proprietary technology or something new that UiPath is offering here in the tech landscape? No. They've just built their own versions of existing tech components and deployed them on a single offering. Okay, so it does bring disjointed solutions into one package to sell, which has some value. So next we look at the customers of UiPath, right? Who is actually paying and why do they keep paying? So if we look at the slide, sorry, no, this is the wrong slide. I think, let me have a look for it here. Yes, yeah, this is the right one. It's got the chart showing the line running up and to the right, which is a good thing. It's all those companies that are paying the price for their poor decision making in the past, right? And need to choose option B. These are mid to large size companies operating in various sectors from healthcare, finance, all sorts. You've got a back office, you've got some client facing things. Let's try and automate some of that. Looking at this slide though, it is looking like it's missing something. I don't know. I've been seeing it around, but it just slips my mind sometimes. Oh, wait, I've got it. This is it here. Yeah. That's much better. That makes sense to me now. That will solve it. Great, so now that we know who the suckers are, I mean the clients, how does $1 of revenue actually end up as owner cash? So very quickly, it's a whistle-stop tour through the income statement and cash flow. Basically, last year they had about 1.5 billion in revenue. Very nice. We've got some licenses, subscription services, professional services. Bulk of it comes from subscription and licenses for their software. Great. Now is the cost of that revenue? Pretty good at 246 million. So leaving them with some nice gross profit of 1.18 billion. But then something happens. Sales and marketing, 738 million. Research and development, 380 million. General and admin, 226 million. Total operating expense of 1.3 billion. So we generate 1.18 billion in gross profit and we spend 1.34 billion in operating costs. Right, this is the company that's, right, sale prop is entirely around automation and reducing headcount, reducing operating costs to make you more profitable. Yet they're now at an operating loss of 162 million. Doesn't look very good. Well, let's see what they're actually doing with the cash they make. Okay, so they generated 320 million of positive cash flow. Phew. So they are generating positive cash flow. But what are they actually doing with that? Of that 320 million, the majority of the outflow is actually just in relation to purchasing their own shares back. Well, I guess that's a good thing, you know, you're returning some of that cash to shareholders. But overall, it's not a very exciting look of financial statements, I'll just tell you that much. Now let's see if UiPath is in a position where it can actually fend off any competition and keep growing. So in UiPath's case, the primary moat is around its switching cost. Okay, once they're embedded in a client's data model, it's very hard for that client to then go ripping it out without looking really bad for putting it in the first place. But that doesn't mean it's impossible for them to lose clients. What needs to happen is that there's a better offering at potentially a reduced price that comes along That wouldn't immediately happen in the short run, right? These clients wouldn't flock in the short run because it does take years to implement these solutions. Instead, you would see that play out in the more medium to long term. Next, we look at the capital discipline of management, and we actually saw in the cash flow statements that they're doing the basics, right? They've got share buybacks, they're growing some operating cash, but it really is basics. Nothing interesting, nothing flashy there. Are there any red flags? Well, almost certainly, right? The stock-based compensation is enormous. It's dwarfing the business. Again, why? Another point is that almost all the voting power sits with UiPath's founder, okay? This founder is there. He is going to take this company where he wants to take it. You have no choice or say in the matter. It's up to him to decide how he wants to run it. Speaking of the founder's choices, it was interesting that in 2023, he ended up leasing one of his private jets to his own company, which wasn't a very good look. And ultimately, the board managed to rail that in after convincing him. In terms of incentives, we want to make sure that management is aligned with owners of the business. And yeah, overall, there is improving incentive alignment where the stock-based compensation for the execs. So what is stopping UiPath from doubling in size today? Well, it's very simple. It's the culture. The business has built its culture around attracting high account values, right? These are big clients that they can embed the system in and then bill the license and subscription services to on an annual basis. This has led their business model to being very concentrated in a few large clients. And these systems aren't easy to implement, right? You do require some computer geeks to get in there, get their hands dirty, and implement the system. So there is a limiting factor when it comes to growing UiPath. So what's the current workaround? Well, UiPath is exploring what they call these partnership programs, okay? Effectively, if they can start educating partners on how to implement the software themselves, then they don't have to be the ones directly doing it anymore. And this would then lead to, in theory, more growth. So what is the lie that investors are telling themselves when it comes to UiPath? And I'm so tired of the same bias coming up in each of these company first, price last episodes. But again, we're looking at people saying things like, Path, this automation leader is set to dominate agentic AI. I mean, those are just, we've got all the buzzwords. We've got the automation, we've got the agentic AI. Another Reddit post here, this individual had a very long due diligence post on Path. And one of the comments that they had there was, UiPath is positioned as the Salesforce of automation. Okay. In other episodes, we showed how many people use the Amazon of X example. In this case, this individual saying that they're going to be the Salesforce of automation, essentially that what Salesforce did for customer relationship management and improving marketing and sales funnels, they're going to do for the back-end office work. There's a comment here by Elderson710 that I liked. It said, too much to read, throwing 10K on it anyways. It's as good a reason as any, I guess. So yeah, we're dealing with a narrative fallacy, right? The story is greater than the math. People buy into the story more than the actual numbers that the business is doing. Salesforce of automation, cool. Mitigation, just don't buy the hype. Understand the limitations of the business. Understand the growth struggles that are ahead for UiPath. So where does this put the verdict, right? Do we want to own, watch, or avoid? Well, we've seen some improving cash flows. Nothing great, nothing flashy. The moat, it's meaningful, right? Once they've locked in those big customers, it is tough for them to rip it out without looking silly. In terms of capital discipline, I've seen better, right? I think just the leasing your own private jet to their own company for $1.3 million, it's not a great look. It's just, why? So unnecessary. The bottleneck, right? Preventing them from growing today and using the partnership programs, that's not frictionless. That takes real execution, and there is risk that it doesn't work out. And then there's this growth narrative fallacy around the whole agentic AI and the automation, and they'll be the Salesforce of automation, and they'll just get it right, and it'll just be easy, and it'll just grow, and there we go. Not reality. So what do we want to see for us to be able to consider UiPath as an own? Well, looking at it today, we do want to see improved governance, okay? The governance risk is massive. Owner control, massive share-based compensation to all the execs. I mean, they're having one big party over there. The other point is that the bottleneck is real. We need to see tangible revenue growth from the partnership program. Okay, that needs to come through in a way that's meaningful for the business. And lastly, we want to look at the price of UiPath And to be perfectly honest, this is probably the most attractive part about the business. It is massively suppressed at the moment by the market. The market is asking UiPath to show something, show that you can grow, show that you have something under your sleeve that makes us want to buy you. Because on the face of it, it's okay, it's slowly improving, but there's nothing drastic on the horizon for the business. Where it's out of alignment is around the whole agentic AI, Salesforce of automation narrative. There are a lot of retail traders that are just buying the stock without actually doing any due diligence, and as we just saw with Alderson 710. Although the market is suppressing the stock, right? It's consolidating. It hasn't really grown this year. It's just remained flat. That doesn't mean it's an undervalued business, okay? The narrative is that it is undervalued relative to its peers. But that narrative completely ignores the stock dilution that the owners are putting on the business, as well as the founders' control, okay? Factor those in, and it's not as an appealing investment as people make it out online. So that's it for UiPath. It is a watch. We have some risk on triggers, but it isn't an immediately obvious buy. There's a lot of content online about UiPath being an undervalued gem and people hopping on, buying the stock without actually doing any due diligence. And if there's one thing you should take away from this episode, it's that nothing's changed in how people get you to buy stuff, okay? Marketing is marketing. It's there to take intent into action and for you to buy the thing. Once you've bought the thing, only then does the reality set in and you realize there's a lot of work ahead of us. This wasn't as easy as they made it out to be. And that applies even to the selling of automation software for your business. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Company First, Price Last, and I'll see you in the next one.